All right, so today we're going to be discussing section 2.2 in our science book. This is all going to be about protists and fungi. In this video specifically, we're going to be worrying about protists. If you've ever seen water under a microscope, clean water, or maybe even water from the pond, or a lake, or an ocean, or anything, you would have seen protists. You would have seen some of the protists we're going to discuss today. They are really exciting. My goal is to get us in the lab so we can go down and look at some of these things. Maybe have you guys bring in some water samples. That would be pretty cool. So, we're going to be discussing a lot today, so you need to have your notebook ready. Before we watch, it would be a good idea for you to do the YouTube and search in Protists for Kids, and that's spelled P-R-O-T-I-S-T. Protists for Kids or Protist Introduction. Again, try to find one that's about 3 to 5 minutes long. You really don't need much more than that. It'll kind of give you the absolute basics so you can take notes a little easier. Let's begin. So when we're dealing with protists, there are generally two different types. There's a plant-like protist and an animal-like protist. First thing you need to write down under types of protists are animal or plant-like. Plant-like protists are autotrophs, meaning they contain chloroplasts and make their own food. The other type are animal-like and fungus-like. Animal-like and fungus-like protists are heterotrophs, meaning they have to get their food from somewhere else. So I like some of the pictures I'm going to show you on the iPad. This one is an autotrophic protist, and it says team autotroph below. So I thought that was pretty funny. And so you have an angry guy for your animal one. There we go. An angry goat. Angry goat. Angry goat is angry, I guess. So, all right. So let's get going. So, the next thing you guys need to write down are a couple different types of the protists. The first couple we're going to go over is animal-like protists. So you need to write down animal-like protists. The first one we're going to worry about are called protozoans. And protozoans are animal-like protists, and they're grouped according to how they move. The word protozoa, I want you to write this down too, means little animal. Because they behave like little animals. So they're not animals, but they behave like microscopic animals. They hunt and gather food like microbes. So they look, when you're watching them, you'll see them hunt kind of like what an animal does. All protozoans digest their food in what's known as a vacuole. V-A-C-U-O-L-E, a vacuole. This vacuole is like their stomach. And I'm going to show you a plant that's got a full vacuole and an empty one. And you can see the difference. So I want you to illustrate this. So you see a full one and an empty one. And that's called the vacuole. That's their stomach. So now we're getting into the different types of protists. This first one I want you to write down is called an amoeba. And I'm going to show you a picture of it on the iPad. Amoebas are really cool. They can have a shell-like structure, or they can have no shell, and they're actually called a naked amoeba. When we look at amoeba under a microscope, they're really cool because they kind of move around, and they have a pseudofoot called a pseudopod. And I'm going to show you guys a picture of one on the iPad. You're going to have to diagram this guy, so make sure you pause it and do a good job diagramming, because that's going to be part of your points on your notes. So you can see an amoeba there, and I wrote in nice big blue letters his feet right next to the pseudopod. So pause the recording and draw this guy down. Amoebas are really cool. I can't wait to show you guys some. Some facts about amoeba, which you're going to need to write down. They live in water or moist places, and they have a cell membrane, but no cell wall. What you're going to see is we classify these different types of protists by how they move. All right. The next one we're going to see is called a flagellate, and a flagellate moves by a kind of like a horsetail. It's like a whip. And it's behind them, and they move around, and this thing whips, and it kind of shoots them around like a jet ski, and that's called a flagellum. And I'm going to show you one right here. So go ahead and pause the player and write that down. Alright, so if you're watching, that means you've already illustrated, and I want you to make sure that you go through and you write down all those nice parts of the eukaryotic cell in there. So we see nucleus and chloroplast. I need to see all that. Alright, these guys are the smallest, and they may have one of these flagellum, or they may have several. And when we see different ones on videos, or have you draw, or we actually look at them under a microscope, you may see different ones that have multiple flagellums. Alright, the next one that we're going to have is called a Psilophora. What I want you guys to do is write down paramecium, and you'll see the name on the top. Alright, these guys move by hairy little fingers hanging off their end of them. They're covered in these things, and they move around, and they're called cilia. Alright, so I want you to write this down. Draw this guy here, cilia. They move around by cilia. Alright, so I hope you wrote that down. They're called cilia, and they live in almost every aquatic kind of area. So when we see them under microscopes, we may see amoebas, parameciums, and those cilias. It's going to be pretty cool. Now, we're on to plant-like protists. So make sure you have a new heading and you write plant-like protists. So we saw animal-like ones. Now we're looking at the plant-like ones. These guys are all algae. So if you've ever seen this on a lake, you know you're looking at a plant-like protist. And these called are algae. Alright? And these guys are the foundation of all of Earth's life chains. So something else eats these, something else eats that, and then all of a sudden we come around and eat that next biggest thing. There are 3 different types of plant-like algae. The first one we're going to look at is a euglena. These are plant-like and animal-like. Make sure you guys write these down, illustrate this. Now, you may look at this and say, this is the same thing as the other one. It doesn't matter. You're going to need to illustrate this under plant-like protist. Okay, these guys, the euglena, are both plant-like and animal-like. They are autotrophs and heterotrophs. So they get their energy from themselves and from sunlight, and they're heterotrophs because they get it from the surrounding waters. Alright, these next guys are photosynthetic autotrophs, and these are called Bacillariophyta. Bacillariophyta. I'll make sure I write that on the board. That's a lot, alright? And they are photosynthetic autotrophs, so make sure you draw this guy down. These guys have shells of silica around them to protect them. And they make up a lot of the phytoplankton. So in your notes, go ahead and write down a little note next to him that he is a phytoplankton. Alright, this next one is super cool. If you guys have ever heard of like the red tide, kills a lot of fish, it's because of these guys coming up next. These are called dinoflagella. So just like you have the flagellates earlier, put dino in front of it. They are a major component of marine phytoplankton. And it's just when they get in large groups, they absorb red light from the sky, and then that's what you see. So here's some here's a big example of what I'm talking about, the red tide. All right, and these algae have at least 2 flagellates set at right angles to each other and thick cell walls. So those guys are nasty. They can actually choke out the water, and if you Google red tide problems, you'll see that when this kind of algae kind of gets together and they start forming and clumping together, they choke out the water and they actually are killing fish and other land or other marine life. So if it happens, they close beaches and they close out all the kind of economy from the area until those bacteria and all those algae just kind of go away. The third set we're going to write down are multicellular algae. So there's single cellular algae, which is those microscopic ones we saw earlier, and now we have multicellular, meaning they're big. We can see them, we can look at them and see them. All right. So you got a whole new heading called multicellular algae. And these guys are all characterized by their color. So the first one we're going to draw, and you guys are going to illustrate with color, because we have to, their color, are Rhodophyta. So that's Rhodophyta, Rhodophyta, and they're red seaweeds. Here's a red one. Go ahead and pause that so you can illustrate that guy. All right, and so if you're looking at me, that means you've already drawn it. And they're found in warm or cold marine environments along the coastlines in deeper water. So they're really deep. All right, this next one, it's brown. It's going to look like noodles when I show you. All right, and this is called brown algae. That's all you need to write down. It's brown algae. And they're found in cool salt water along rocky coast. So if the red one is on marine coast, deep, this is on rocky coast. And you can look at these and they're giant kelp. All right, they're the most complex, so I'm going to have you Google and research giant kelp. And that is the most advanced version of these guys. All right, and the last one, let's see, of all the algae we've seen. Well, there's red algae, there's brown algae. What's the most common color of algae? Green. So the last and the most common one are Chlorophyta, and that's green algae. Chlorophyta, and that's Chlorophyta, Chlorophyta, and they're found in all freshwater. So if you ever see Chlorophyta, it's green algae. All right. I'm gonna have you guys do a few more. The Volvox is a hollow boll. It's a B-O-L-L, not a ball, but a boll, composed of hundreds of flagellated cells in a single layer. So this guy is flat. He's flat. He looks like a ball, but he's flat. And this is a type of algae. I want you guys to write that down as well. Volvox, V-O-L-V-O-X. And the last one I want to cover, this one is super cool. It's called a slime mold. Slime mold. So you may be writing all these down. Slime mold. They have traits both like fungus and animals. During good times, they live as independent amoeba-like cells, dining on fungi and bacteria. But if conditions become unfavorable, not enough food, the temperature isn't right, whatever, individual cells begin gathering together into a single structure. So these are all individual. If you can get real close and see, you can see that they look like little tiny balls all pushed together. When there's not enough food, they all kind of come together. All right? They will then, the new communal structure produces a slimy covering, and it's called a slug. The slug oozes towards light. When all the cells, since they come across more food, the slug stops. These guys separate and they go along their own ways. All right? The last thing we need to talk about is how protists reproduce. All right, and I like this little cartoon that I found. It says, "Oh, my parents split up when I was young." These guys are bacteria or protists because they all split. All right, they split by two different ways, so you need to write these down. First is asexual through binary fission. So they simply divide, make a copy of themselves, and go on. The second, they have sexual reproduction, meaning that the two individual protists get together and they swap DNA and they go through and then they divide. And then it happens all over again. So there's asexual and sexual reproduction for protists. And that's it. Protist.